So here is broadly what you're looking at post the 3rd of May. Look out for the district that you're in, and if you're in a green zone, then restrictions will be eased. If you're in a red zone, then the restrictions will largely stay. When the government last released data, there were 123 hotspot districts with large outbreaks, 47 districts which had clusters, 207 non-hotspots districts with a few cases, and 350 non-infected districts. Now, non-infected districts can very quickly see life returning to a near sense of normalcy, whereas the 123 hotspot districts will see restrictions continue. But there's a lot that needs to be thought about, even in the manner in which we go about planning this exit strategy. Because if, for example, you've got one district, District A, with lots of cases, and another district, District B, which doesn't have cases, and in District B life starts returning to normal, people will go meet each other, suddenly the number of cases could start spiking, and that can create problems. One person who's been thinking very deeply about what the lockdown exit strategy could be is Professor Vipul Mathur. He is Professor of Economics at the Indian Institute of Management in Kolkata. He's written a piece that's been tracked very closely. We invited him to join us on this broadcast. Also with us on the show is Sameer Saran, President of the Observer Research Foundation, one of Asia's top, most influential think tanks. And Pawan Verma is a former officer of the Indian Foreign Services, has been Chief Minister's advisor in Bihar. So welcome. I want to go across to Sameer Saran first. Sameer, if you look at the government's plan, it seems to be a three-way process. One, if you're in a red-hot district with lots of outbreaks, then life stays locked in. If you're in a green zone, then they want people to start returning to a near sense of normal. And if you're in an orange zone, somewhere in the middle, there will be some restrictions, but there'll be some calibrated easing of the lockdown. Do you think that will be the right way to go for a country like India, Sameer?
Rahul, that may be the intention, but it's not that simple, as you have yourself described earlier in your remarks, that it's very difficult to have these rigid boundaries separating green, red, and orange, if I was to call it that. I think there are two big challenges before this government, and let me just try and quantify it. You, of course, have mentioned that there are a large number of districts, 350 districts, if I heard you correctly, which have not yet had COVID cases or which are not infected. And therefore, you are suggesting that perhaps we could have a more normal routine implemented there, a more normal life being conducted after May 3rd. Now, it's not that simple. Many of these districts have very few isolation beds. If you were to have an infection spread in those districts, I mean, let me give you a number. There are 183 districts across the country that have less than 100 isolation beds. And a large number of them have not seen infection yet. As many as 53 districts in UP have fewer than 100 isolation beds. So now, again, only 31 have seen infection till now. The others have not. The point I'm trying to make is that while having green, orange, and red are good colors, these have to be accompanied by antibody seroprevalence surveys before we decide what we want to do with them. So I think testing green zones is extremely important so that we don't have asymptomatic carriers, we don't have spurts and a rise in infection rates in many districts, which can be overwhelmed. I think one is testing has to accompany any form of relaxation, number one. Number two, I think in every zone, PPE, personal protective equipment, and clinical gear to our healthcare staff is absolutely essential. Just because a zone is green doesn't mean that our healthcare workers can't be infected in those zones. We have seen how it has happened earlier. So I think we have to take extreme care in certain critical infrastructure, and medical infrastructure is extremely critical at this moment. Irrespective of the zone they belong in, they have to be treated to be red zones.
Professor Vipul Mathur, you wrote a piece about the problems with demarcating districts as District A and B. Why don't you explain to our viewers what your concerns are and what you think of the strategy the government is currently working on?
Okay, so thanks a lot for inviting me here. What I have actually tried to attempt is essentially trying to add one more layer to these arguments that largely make sense, and that dimension is essentially of an economic contact intensity. And the idea is that at the heart of both the virus transmission and the economic activity is a human-to-human interaction. So while we are trying to mitigate the impact of virus, we are also impeding the economic activity. And there is a knife-edge path that we have to travel in order to optimally balance the both. So one way to think about these things is to actually move away from the conventional geographical maps and look at the whole Indian economy as occupational maps. Okay, let me explain. So at the level of occupations, we are dealing with a wide variety of occupations which involve different level of contact or proximity that we have to deal with. And as we are going to unwind the lockdown, we can gradually start unwinding those occupations first, which involve a lesser degree of contact. And eventually, when we would have broken the back of the virus enough, we can start unwinding the lockdown in areas, in occupations which involve higher contact
So
intensity.
build on this theory of economic contact intensity. What are the kind of occupations that you think can be re-allowed post the 3rd of May? And what are the kind of occupations you think we'll need to put a hold on for much longer than the 3rd of May?
So I think sectors inherently which are less contact intensive are sectors such as forestry, fishing, heavy machinery, machine tools, finance, insurance, business services, consulting, telecommunications, electric, gas, water supply, etc. Whereas on the other hand, sectors which are highly contact intensive are sectors such as education. Banking is also between mid to high contact intensive. So I think one has to look at these occupations in the Indian context and try to understand the whole spectrum on which they fall in terms of their economic contact intensity.
So that's an interesting paradigm to think about. Don't just think about the nature of the district or the number of cases there, think about the intensity of the economic contact.
I think the unit of analysis should move away from the district or the administrative units, and we should start looking at the occupational maps of India, then the conventional demographic or the district administrative maps.
Interesting insights from the IIM professor there. Now, Pawan Verma, you're making a point that the lockdown itself should end largely. However, if I show you what chief ministers said today, virtually all chief ministers, regardless of what their political affiliation was, they're asking for the lockdown to be extended. So it's not as if it's only BJP chief ministers who are saying what the Prime Minister wants to hear. Even non-BJP chief ministers are asking for the lockdown to be extended, which clearly means that they see rationale in continuation of the lockdown. Why don't you, Pawan Verma?
Very simply put, Rahul, it's not any more sustainable as a binary that we fight the coronavirus and keep the economy shut. I think that much has been made clear in this meeting, and I think that is the overall consensus. We have to do both. It's a difficult choice, no doubt, but it's not either or one against the other. Secondly, I want to say to you that if we must put the economy gradually on its feet, we've got to get rid of the underlying assumption that opening up the economy and getting it running is somehow antithetical to our fight against the coronavirus, because, frankly, both the center and the state need resources. If they don't earn resources, how are they going to take on this pandemic in terms of both fighting it and providing ameliorative care and the fiscal stimulus the economy needs? Thirdly, frankly, I find it very difficult to understand how we can divide the economy into either occupational or geographical zones in a very compartmentalized way, rigidly, inflexibly, because the economy is a holistic one. It's a complete whole. Yes, there are very easily earmarked hot zones or red zones which need to be specially looked after. But just now, Haryana has announced that no one from Delhi can enter it unless you have a permit. Now, there are people from Delhi who work in Haryana or in Gurgaon and vice versa. If you open up the economy and yet allow this kind of draconian measure to be taken all of a sudden, you're going to
So what's your suggestion? What you're stating is true, and we're in an unprecedented world at this moment. What's your suggestion? To find fault with what the government is doing is one thing. Do you have some meaningful suggestion to offer?
Yes, I would like to suggest that please don't pursue the opening up of the economy as if it is a piece of calibration being done on a game you are playing inside your office. It's not possible. I would suggest that the lockdown has, and just give me 30 seconds now, Rahul. The lockdown has served its purpose. We needed it. The government did the right thing. It has sensitized people to social distancing. It has reduced the transmission rate. It has given us time to upgrade health infrastructure. Now, like most countries, we've got to look towards making the economy stand on its feet. And for that, Rahul, my worry is, and this is my suggestion, a police-led bandobast with vast discretionary powers with bureaucrats on the ground. An industrialist called me and said, I have been told you can open your plant where there are 12,000 workers employed, but if one case of coronavirus occurs, the district magistrate can say that for 3 months your plant will be closed. Now, which employer will start with activity with this Damocles sword hanging over him? So don't do it half-heartedly. Take a firm stand that it cannot be sequential anymore, Rahul, that the last coronavirus ends and then we begin the economy. We have to literally fight the coronavirus and fight to keep to make the economy recuperate and stand on its feet. No. Now, if that is the case, we must allow it to do so.
Samir
and
Saran,
chief ministers, last point I want to make, chief ministers of states, some of them, I'm sorry to use the phrase, and I'm not saying BJP or otherwise, some of them are suffering from what I call decisional inertia, which is to continue to keep doing what you are doing without any creative or realistic options to what you are doing. So therefore, you can't just say police-led bandobast, lock people in. In any case, that has limited returns now because it is physically impossible to carry out self-isolating and social distancing norms in the kind of circumstances the majority of the population in India lives.
Okay, so Samir Saran, you've been making a point about a smart lockdown and you've been focusing on the on ORF, on test. But the reality is when we imported all these rapid testing kits, they turned out to be faulty, and the Indian government, the ICMR, has now said don't use these kits because the variations are so high. So the point that you made last time you came on my show was ramp up testing capacities. That was attempted, but now it's come a cropper, Samir.
No, we have lost time, and no doubt it's a setback. And I had hoped that by the time we reach May 3rd, we would have been able to do some of the pool testings and wider testings to actually establish zones that are safer for certain kind of activities. I agree both with Vipul and both with Ambassador Verma. Vipul is absolutely right. We have to be careful about certain forms of trade and business. But Ambassador Verma is perhaps even more pragmatic in his assessment that when you begin your economic activity, it is very difficult to limit it through rigid boundaries or rigid locations. I will give you a case in point. We are going through the cultivation season now. We are having people who are going to be taking crops, moving to mandis, crossing states. You will have people who are working on farms, moving across borders. These are pretty, high contact activities. You've seen even in our daily procurement of vegetables for our own home, we are crowding. So what I'm saying is it's very difficult to be able to contain human contact beyond a certain point. We have to still try our best. We have to keep testing wider. We have to be able to now confront certain spurts that may take place at certain zones. And we have to have what someone recently termed as the mobile wards available to go to various zones where we might have certain breakouts. We should be able to have green zones and be prepared to move them back into a containment area if something happens. But Ambassador Verma is right. We have to coexist with this challenge for the next 12 to 18 months. Okay, so now, as a country which is at $2,000 per capita income, please believe me that we are killing ourselves by not acting immediately. Economic activity is important for us to be able to respond to the virus. It is not, we are not ignoring the virus by going into a new phase of economic activity. We are actually strengthening our abilities to respond to that challenge the virus poses to us.
Okay, I want to show our viewers what's happening globally. What's being said really sets the stage for us to zoom out for a moment, look at the world map, and then compare what's happening in India with what's happening globally. So let's see how long the lockdown has been on for in different countries of the world and how that compares with India. What you'll see on the chart behind you is really how long the lockdown's been on in India vis-a-vis elsewhere. And what date does it go on till? So in Italy, the lockdown was for 57 days. It ends on the 3rd of May in Lombardy in Italy, in Wuhan. The lockdown is now over. It ended on the 8th of April. It lasted for 77 days. In Spain, the lockdown is for 57 days. It goes on till the 9th of May. In France, the lockdown is for 56 days. Started on the 17th of March, goes on till the 11th of May. In India, the lockdown started on the 25th of March, it goes on till the 3rd of May, and it's a 40-day lockdown. So in comparison with other countries of the world, the Indian lockdown is actually smaller. So it isn't, Pawan Verma, as if the Indian lockdown is much longer than the global lockdown. In fact, the Indian lockdown at this moment is much smaller than countries like China, Italy, Spain and France, which have far more advanced and sophisticated medical care facilities, which India doesn't if this virus starts to go out of control.
Well, you know, Rahul, all evidence so far, and I'm not trying to be over-optimistic, all evidence seems to point that contrary to expectation, the fatality rate in India has been surprisingly and happily much lower. The number of cases will go up as testing increases, but there is no doubt that fatality rates are lower. And so I believe that every country must make decisions in accordance with its own assessment of the impact of the disease. Secondly, the suffering in countries like India, where the social safety security net has not been as extensively developed as some of the developed countries, is far beyond sustenance. The poor, the marginalized, the deprived, the underbelly of our economy, which constitutes the overwhelming majority of our people, are bearing a disproportionate burden of the lockdown because, as you yourself said, we have millions upon millions of people who must earn every day to eat at night.
Sure.
And they are living in conditions where a lockdown in any case is not efficacious. So therefore, a country has to decide in accordance with its own situation. And while I believe that we should be sensitive to the fact that there are some zones which definitely need to be contained, but on the whole, India must take a decision keeping its own realities in mind.
Okay, Samir Saran, Pawan Verma, Professor Vipul Mathur, thank you for joining me on the Newstrack tonight and share your varied but very sharp. Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kanwal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.